The gleaming chrome handles of the Sterling Industries building caught the morning sun as Cyrus Thompson pushed through the revolving doors, his calloused hands gripping a manila envelope containing his final invoice. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed. Because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. He never imagined that delivering a simple catering bill would change everything. What started as a routine business transaction would spiral into a challenge that exposed hidden strengths, shattered social barriers, and proved that sometimes the most unlikely heroes emerge from the most ordinary moments. This is the story of how a single father's quiet determination conquered more than just an arm wrestling match. The aroma of fresh coffee and bacon still clung to Cyrus's work clothes as he stepped into the marble lobby of Sterling Industries. After 15 years of running the kitchen at Blue Collar Diner, he had grown accustomed to the sharp contrast between his world and places like this. The receptionist's perfectly manicured nails clicked against her keyboard as she directed him toward the executive floor, her smile polite but distant in the way that suggested she could smell the grease and honest work on his uniform. Cyrus had been supplying breakfast catering for Sterling Industries, early morning board meetings for the past 6 months. The contract wasn't large, but it was steady income that helped cover his son Mason's after-school programs and the ever-growing pile of bills that seemed to multiply faster than his paycheck. At 32, Cyrus had learned to appreciate steady work and reliable customers, even if it meant navigating the uncomfortable spaces where his worn work boots felt out of place against imported Italian marble. The elevator climbed silently to the 20th floor, and Cyrus found himself studying his reflection in the polished steel doors. His broad shoulders filled out his diner uniform completely. The fabric stretched tight across muscles built from years of lifting heavy pots, hauling supply boxes, and the physical demands of feeding hungry construction workers and factory employees who appreciated substance over presentation. His hands bore the permanent stains and small scars that came from working with hot oil and sharp knives, marks of honest labor that no amount of scrubbing could completely erase. Victoria Sterling's office occupied the corner of the building, with floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a commanding view of Riverside City's industrial district. At 28, she had inherited Sterling Industries from her father 2 years earlier, transforming the century-old manufacturing company into a modern operation that produced precision components for aerospace and automotive industries. Her success had been documented in business magazines and local newspapers, always photographed in tailored suits that spoke of both authority and feminine grace. When Cyrus knocked on her office door, he expected the same brief, professional interaction he had experienced with other executives. Instead, Victoria Sterling rose from behind her mahogany desk with genuine warmth, extending her hand for a firm handshake that surprised him with its strength. Her office reflected both her family's legacy and her personal taste, with antique manufacturing equipment displayed alongside contemporary art pieces that somehow created harmony rather than conflict. Their conversation began with routine business matters, but Cyrus noticed that Victoria asked questions about his operation that went beyond simple vendor relations. She inquired about his suppliers, his cooking philosophy, and the challenges of running a small business in an economy that increasingly favored large chains over local establishments. Her interest seemed authentic rather than merely polite, and Cyrus found himself sharing details about his commitment to serving real food made from quality ingredients, even when it meant accepting smaller profit margins. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. The transformation in their interaction occurred when Victoria mentioned her ongoing struggle to find catering that could satisfy her brother Derek's demanding palate. Derek Sterling had returned from culinary school in Europe with expensive tastes and sharp opinions about American food culture. He had dismissed every catering service Victoria had hired for company events, creating tension that went beyond simple menu preferences into deeper issues of family dynamics and business philosophy. When Derek Sterling walked into the Blue Collar Diner 3 days later, Cyrus immediately understood why Victoria had seemed apologetic when arranging the meeting. Derek carried himself with the particular arrogance that came from expensive education and inherited wealth, his designer clothing and perfect posture making him look like he had wandered into the wrong neighborhood by accident. He surveyed the diner's modest interior with barely concealed disdain, his nose wrinkling slightly at the honest smells of fried onions and strong coffee that had soaked into the walls over decades of serving working families. Cyrus wiped his hands on his apron and approached Derek's table, determined to maintain his professional demeanor despite the younger man's obvious condescension. Derek had positioned himself at the corner booth, the one usually reserved for regulars who wanted to watch the kitchen while they ate, but his body language suggested he was studying the operation like a food critic preparing to write a scathing review. When Cyrus offered the standard greeting he gave to all customers, Derek's response was immediate and cutting. The critique began before Derek had even tasted the food. He questioned the quality of Cyrus's ingredients, the sophistication of his cooking techniques, and the educational background that qualified him to cater corporate events. Each comment was delivered with the casual cruelty of someone who had never worked for anything in his life, dismissing years of experience and dedication with the wave of a manicured hand. Cyrus listened patiently, recognizing that Derek's behavior reflected his own insecurities rather than any legitimate assessment of the food or service. The other customers in the diner began to notice the tension, their conversations growing quieter as they sensed something unpleasant developing in their usual sanctuary. Martha Wilson, who had been coming for coffee every morning for 20 years, shot disapproving glances at Derek's table. Big Jim Rodriguez, still wearing his construction company shirt after pulling a double shift, looked ready to intervene if the situation escalated. These were Cyrus's people, customers who had become friends and supporters, who understood the value of honest work and genuine character. Derek's attacks became more personal as the meal progressed, moving from criticism of the food to questions about Cyrus's qualifications and background. He made pointed references to proper culinary training and the difference between real cooking and, quote, cafeteria food, his voice carrying the particular tone that educated people sometimes used when they wanted to demonstrate their superiority over those they considered beneath them. Cyrus felt his jaw tighten with each comment, but he maintained his composure, knowing that losing his temper would only confirm Derek's prejudices. The breaking point came when Derek made a disparaging comment about blue-collar establishments and their inability to understand refined palates. The phrase was delivered with such casual contempt that it seemed to suck the warmth out of the entire diner. Cyrus felt something shift inside him, not anger exactly, but a quiet determination that had been building throughout Derek's performance. He had spent 15 years serving honest food to honest people, building relationships and earning respect through consistency and character rather than credentials and connections. Mason chose that moment to burst through the diner's front door, his 10-year-old energy filling the space as he called out his usual after-school greeting to his father. The boy's arrival seemed to highlight the contrast between Derek's entitled cynicism and the genuine warmth that characterized the diner's atmosphere. Mason had grown up in this space, doing homework at corner tables while his father worked, learning life lessons from customers who treated him like family rather than an inconvenience. Derek's attention shifted to Mason with the same critical assessment he had applied to everything else, and Cyrus felt his protective instincts sharpen. When Derek made a casual comment about limited opportunities and breaking cycles, his words carried implications that went far beyond restaurant criticism into territory that Cyrus would not tolerate. The suggestion that Mason's future was somehow predetermined by his father's occupation crossed a line that transformed the encounter from professional disagreement into something much more personal. The challenge emerged organically from the tension that had been building throughout Derek's visit. When Derek stood to leave, making one final dismissive comment about knowing quality when he saw it, Cyrus found himself responding with quiet confidence rather than defensive anger. He suggested that perhaps Derek's judgment was based more on appearances than actual understanding, that real strength and character weren't always packaged in expensive clothing and fancy degrees. Derek's response revealed the core of his character. Unable to defend his position through logic or evidence, he resorted to the kind of physical challenge that wealthy young men sometimes used when their intellectual superiority was questioned. The arm wrestling match was proposed with the smirking confidence of someone who had never faced real consequences for his arrogance, someone who assumed that physical dominance would follow naturally from social privilege. Victoria arrived at the diner just as Derek was explaining the terms of his challenge. She had come to check on the meeting, hoping that her brother might finally recognize quality when he encountered it, but instead found herself witnessing the kind of confrontation she had feared might develop. Her expression reflected both embarrassment at Derek's behavior and genuine concern for Cyrus, who had shown nothing but professionalism despite obvious provocation. The stakes Derek proposed were characteristically dramatic and inappropriate. If Cyrus could defeat him in arm wrestling, Derek would publicly acknowledge the quality of the diner's food and recommend it for all Sterling Industries events. But if Derek won, Cyrus would have to admit his limitations and withdraw from any future business with the company. The challenge was designed to be humiliating regardless of the outcome, forcing Cyrus into a position where he either backed down and appeared weak, or participated in Derek's game and risked professional consequences. What Derek had not anticipated was Cyrus's calm acceptance of the challenge. Years of physical labor had built more than just muscle. They had developed the kind of quiet confidence that came from knowing exactly what he was capable of achieving. Cyrus had never been particularly interested in displays of strength or dominance, but he recognized that some situations required a response that went beyond words or professional courtesy. The diner's regular customers began to gather around the impromptu arena, their support for Cyrus evident in their positioning and expressions. These were people who understood the value of hard work and genuine character, who had watched Cyrus build his business through dedication and integrity rather than inherited advantages. Their presence transformed the challenge from a private confrontation into a community event, with clear lines drawn between earned respect and entitled arrogance. As Cyrus rolled up his sleeves and positioned himself across from Derek at the small table, he caught Victoria's eye and saw something unexpected in her expression. Beyond the obvious embarrassment at her brother's behavior, there was curiosity and what might have been respect for Cyrus's willingness to defend himself and his values. The moment stretched with anticipation as two very different kinds of strength prepared to test themselves against each other, with consequences that would extend far beyond a simple arm wrestling match. The match lasted exactly 47 seconds, though it felt like an eternity to everyone watching. Derek's confident smirk evaporated within the first 10 seconds as he realized that Cyrus's strength was not the casual fitness of weekend gym sessions, but the relentless power built through years of hauling 50-pound flour sacks and wrestling industrial equipment into submission. The silence in the diner was broken only by Derek's increasingly strained breathing and the subtle creaking of the wooden table as forces far greater than it was designed to handle pressed against its surface. When Cyrus finally drove Derek's hand down to the table with controlled precision, the sound echoed through the diner like a gavel striking judgment. The regular customers erupted in cheers and applause, their celebration reflecting not just victory in a simple contest, but vindication of values they held sacred. Derek sat in stunned silence, staring at his defeated hand as if it belonged to someone else, his carefully constructed sense of superiority crumbling in real time. Victoria's reaction surprised everyone, including herself. Instead of rushing to comfort her humiliated brother or making excuses for his behavior, she found herself studying Cyrus with new appreciation. The quiet dignity with which he had handled Derek's provocation, followed by the decisive demonstration of strength, revealed character traits that her world of boardrooms and country clubs rarely produced. She watched as Cyrus immediately offered Derek a glass of water and suggested they forget the entire incident, displaying the kind of gracious victory that spoke to deeper principles than simple physical dominance. The aftermath of the arm wrestling match created ripples that extended far beyond the diner's walls. Derek's humiliation was complete, but rather than inspiring sympathy, his defeat seemed to expose the hollowness of his previous arrogance. The customers who had witnessed the encounter began sharing the story throughout Riverside City's tight-knit working community, and within days, Cyrus found himself something of a local legend. But the attention brought complications he had not anticipated, forcing him to navigate newfound fame while maintaining the steady routine that kept his business running and his son's life stable. Victoria began appearing at the diner with increasing frequency, initially claiming she was conducting market research for potential catering contracts, but gradually admitting to herself that her interest went beyond professional considerations. She found herself drawn to the authentic atmosphere Cyrus had created, where conversations were genuine and relationships were built on mutual respect rather than calculated advantage. The contrast with her usual social environment was startling and increasingly appealing. Their conversations evolved from business discussions to more personal territory, as Victoria discovered that Cyrus possessed an intelligence and wisdom that had nothing to do with formal education. He spoke about raising Mason as a single father with insights that revealed deep thoughtfulness about character development, and life priorities. His approach to business reflected ethical considerations that put community benefit ahead of maximum profit, principles that Victoria found both admirable and challenging to her own corporate training. Mason's presence in these interactions added another dimension that Victoria had not expected. The 10-year-old boy displayed a confidence and maturity that reflected his father's influence, but also a natural curiosity about Victoria's world that created bridging opportunities between their different backgrounds. Mason's questions about business and leadership were both innocent and perceptive, revealing a mind that was processing complex social dynamics with surprising sophistication. The developing relationship between Victoria and Cyrus did not go unnoticed by either of their respective communities. Victoria's friends and business associates began questioning her frequent visits to a neighborhood they considered beneath their social standards. The comments started as gentle teasing about slumming and research projects, but gradually took on a more critical tone as Victoria's investment became more obvious and sustained. Her board of directors, many of whom had worked with her father for decades, began expressing concerns about her judgment and priorities. Cyrus faced different but equally challenging pressures from his own community. Some regular customers worried that his newfound connection to Sterling Industries might change the diner's character or pricing, while others questioned whether Victoria's interest was genuine or simply a wealthy person's temporary fascination with authentic experiences. The skepticism was protective rather than malicious, reflecting the community's understanding of how relationships between different social classes typically developed and ended. The crisis that would test their growing connection emerged from an unexpected source. Sterling Industries was facing pressure to reduce operating costs in response to increased competition from overseas manufacturers. The board of directors, led by Victoria's uncle, Robert Sterling, proposed eliminating, quote, non-essential expenses, including the expensive catering contracts that had been Derek's pet project. The vote was scheduled for the next board meeting, and Victoria realized that her relationship with Cyrus had inadvertently placed his business in jeopardy. Robert Sterling's opposition to Victoria's leadership had been building since she inherited the company, and he saw the catering controversy as an opportunity to demonstrate her poor judgment to other board members. He began circulating reports about Victoria's, quote, inappropriate associations and suggesting that her personal relationships were compromising her professional decision-making. The campaign was subtle but effective, playing on existing concerns about her age and experience, while introducing questions about her commitment to the company's traditional values. The board meeting that would determine the fate of Cyrus's catering contract became a battleground for larger issues about Victoria's leadership and the company's future direction. Victoria found herself defending not just a business relationship, but her right to make decisions based on quality and character rather than social considerations. The arguments revealed deep philosophical differences about how business should be conducted and what factors should influence corporate partnerships. Derek's role in the controversy was particularly painful for Victoria. Rather than acknowledging his own poor behavior or supporting his sister's judgment, he seemed to enjoy watching her struggle against their uncle's challenge. His defeated ego sought revenge through passive aggression, undermining Victoria's position by remaining silent when his testimony could have supported her case. The family dynamics that had always been complicated became openly hostile as business and personal grievances merged into a single conflict. Cyrus learned about the board meeting's agenda through a carefully worded phone call from Victoria, who tried to minimize the political implications while preparing him for the possibility that their business relationship might be terminated. Her obvious distress revealed how much the outcome meant to her personally, but Cyrus understood that the forces arrayed against them were more powerful than individual preferences or professional merit. The situation forced him to confront the reality that his growing feelings for Victoria existed within a context that might make their relationship impossible to sustain. The community's response to news of the threatened contract, continuing to pursue treatments that couldn't restore his physical function. Her criticism stung partly because it contained elements of truth. I had been struggling to accept limitations that felt incompatible with my lifelong belief that sufficient resources and determination could overcome any obstacle. The first session was scheduled for Tuesday at 3 o'clock, and I arrived early to prepare Alex for meeting someone new. He listened without response as I explained that a friend would be visiting, someone who wanted to share music that had helped other children feel better during difficult times. Alex's eyes tracked my movements around the room, but he offered no verbal reaction or facial expression that might indicate interest or concern about the upcoming encounter. His passive acceptance of whatever happened to him had become more painful to witness than active resistance would have been, suggesting a level of emotional withdrawal that worried his psychological care team increasingly. Ryan arrived precisely on time, accompanied by Mia, who carried a small keyboard and the same worn notebook she'd had at the hospital cafe. His approach to Alex was masterful in its restraint. He didn't overwhelm my son with excessive enthusiasm or false cheerfulness, but instead introduced himself quietly and asked permission before sitting down near the hospital bed. Mia followed her father's lead, settling into a chair where Alex could see her without feeling crowded or observed too intensely. Their presence transformed the room's atmosphere immediately, replacing clinical sterility with warmth that felt almost tangible. "Alex, I'm Ryan, and this is my daughter Mia," he said, his voice carrying the same gentle confidence I'd noticed during our first meeting. "Your dad mentioned that you used to play piano before your accident. Mia and I love making music together, and we thought maybe you'd like to hear some of our favorite songs." He waited for any response from Alex, but when none came, he simply nodded to Mia, who began playing a simple melody on the portable keyboard. The song was different from the one Ryan had whistled in the hospital cafe, but it carried the same emotional depth, the same ability to communicate feelings that words couldn't adequately express. As Mia played, Ryan began whistling harmony, creating a musical conversation between father and daughter that felt intimate without being exclusive. They weren't performing for Alex or trying to impress him with technical skill. They were simply sharing something they loved, inviting him to participate as much or as little as he felt comfortable. I watched Alex's face carefully, searching for any sign that the music was reaching him through the walls he'd constructed around himself. For the first few minutes, his expression remained unchanged. The same passive acceptance he'd shown toward every therapeutic intervention we'd attempted. But gradually, almost imperceptibly, something shifted in his eyes. Not excitement or obvious engagement, but a quality of attention that suggested he was actually listening rather than simply enduring another medical procedure disguised as entertainment. When Mia finished the first song, she looked directly at Alex and smiled. "That's one my dad taught me when I was scared about starting school," she said matter-of-factly. "Sometimes music helps me feel braver when things seem really hard or different from what I'm used to." Her words were simple but profound, acknowledging difficulty without dwelling on it, offering connection without demanding immediate reciprocation. Ryan began whistling again, this time the melody I remembered from our first encounter. As the familiar tune filled the hospital room, I noticed Alex's breathing pattern change slightly, becoming deeper and more relaxed than it had been in weeks. His eyes remained fixed on Ryan's face, and for the first time since the accident, my son seemed fully present in the moment rather than lost in internal struggles I couldn't reach or understand. "This song has special meaning in our family," Ryan explained when he finished, sensed the gravity of her visit and quietly settled their bills, leaving the two of them alone in the space that had become meaningful to both of them. Victoria's carefully rehearsed explanation died in her throat as she saw the understanding in Cyrus's eyes, his immediate recognition that the news she carried would change everything between them. The conversation that followed was more painful than either had anticipated. Victoria's attempts to explain the political complexities of corporate governance sounded hollow against the simple reality that Cyrus's business relationship was being terminated because of who he was rather than what he had accomplished. Cyrus listened with the same quiet dignity he had shown during Derek's initial provocation, but Victoria could see the disappointment building behind his controlled expression. What hurt most was Cyrus's immediate concern for Victoria's position, rather than his own losses. He understood instinctively that defending him had cost her political capital she could not afford to lose, and his protective instincts made him want to minimize the damage, even if it meant accepting undeserved consequences. His offer to quietly withdraw from any future business discussions was meant to protect her, but it felt like abandonment to Victoria, who was learning that sometimes doing the right thing required accepting help, rather than trying to shield others from necessary battles. Mason's innocent questions about why Victoria looked sad forced both adults to confront the broader implications of their situation. The 10-year-old's inability to understand why good work wasn't enough to maintain business relationships highlighted the absurdity of social prejudices that adults had learned to accept as normal. His disappointment was pure and uncomplicated, making it harder for Victoria to rationalize the board's decision as simply business necessity. The days following the contract termination brought a cascade of consequences that neither Victoria nor Cyrus had fully anticipated. Word of the board meeting's outcome spread quickly through Riverside City's interconnected business community, with interpretations that reflected the political divisions within local society. Some saw the decision as appropriate maintenance of professional standards, while others recognized it as evidence of class prejudices that kept successful people in separate categories regardless of merit. Victoria's attempts to maintain their personal relationship while respecting the professional boundaries imposed by her board created an impossible balancing act. Every visit to the diner was noted and reported by people who had reasons to monitor her activities, while every public interaction with Cyrus was interpreted as either defiance of board authority or inappropriate favoritism that confirmed concerns about her judgment. Cyrus faced his own set of pressures as news of the terminated contract reached his regular customers and suppliers. Some expressed outrage at Sterling Industries' decision, viewing it as an attack on working-class businesses that threatened the entire community's economic stability. Others questioned whether Cyrus had somehow overreached in his relationship with Victoria, suggesting that maintaining appropriate boundaries might have prevented the conflict entirely. The financial impact of losing the Sterling Industries contract was significant but not devastating for Cyrus's operation. He had built the diner's success on serving the local community rather than depending on corporate accounts, and his customer base remained loyal despite the controversy. But the principle involved in the termination felt like a deeper wound, suggesting that his 15 years of building a reputation through consistent quality and ethical business practices could be dismissed because he didn't belong to the right social circles. Victoria's isolation within her own company became increasingly apparent as board members who had previously supported her began maintaining careful distance from any decisions that might be interpreted as challenging Robert Sterling's growing influence. Her uncle's campaign to undermine her authority was subtle but relentless, using the catering controversy as evidence of judgment problems that extended beyond vendor selection into fundamental questions about leadership capability. The breaking point came during a family dinner at the Sterling estate, where Robert felt confident enough to openly question Victoria's priorities and decision-making processes. The conversation that had begun as routine family business evolved into a direct challenge to Victoria's right to lead the company her father had built. Derek's continued silence during this confrontation confirmed that he had chosen sides in a conflict that went far beyond business disagreements into questions of family loyalty and personal character. Victoria's realization that she was fighting a battle she could not win within the existing power structure forced her to consider options she had never imagined when she inherited Sterling Industries. The company that was supposed to be her legacy was becoming a prison that constrained her ability to act according to her own values and judgment. The choice between conforming to expectations that felt increasingly wrong or striking out in a direction that honored her authentic self became unavoidable. Cyrus watched Victoria struggle with growing concern, recognizing that their relationship had become a catalyst for conflicts that extended far beyond their personal connection. His protective instincts made him want to step away entirely, removing himself as a source of problems in Victoria's professional life, but he was beginning to understand that the issues she faced were fundamental rather than circumstantial, requiring solutions that went deeper than simply avoiding controversial associations. The community center meeting that brought them together again was ostensibly about local economic development, but it became an opportunity for both Victoria and Cyrus to see each other in contexts that revealed their deepest values and commitments. Victoria's passionate advocacy for policies that supported small businesses demonstrated her genuine concern for economic justice, while Cyrus's thoughtful contributions to discussions about community development showed his understanding of complex social and economic dynamics that went far beyond food service. Victoria's resignation from Sterling Industries came on a Tuesday morning, delivered in a boardroom where she had once felt powerful, but now recognized as a stage for performances that had nothing to do with actual leadership. Her letter was brief and professional, citing philosophical differences about company direction, but everyone present understood the deeper currents that had made her position untenable. Robert Sterling's satisfied expression revealed how thoroughly he had orchestrated her departure, using the catering controversy as leverage to reclaim control he believed rightfully belonged to him. The decision to start her own manufacturing consultancy felt both terrifying and liberating, as Victoria cleaned out her corner office overlooking downtown Riverside City. She was abandoning financial security and social status that had defined her identity since childhood, but gaining something more valuable: the freedom to operate according to principles that aligned with her authentic self rather than inherited expectations. Her father's photograph watched from the desk as she packed, and Victoria felt his approval for choosing integrity over convenience. Cyrus learned about Victoria's resignation through Mason, who had overheard conversations at school where other children repeated their parents, discussions about the Sterling family drama. The news reached the diner before Victoria could deliver it personally, creating an atmosphere of subdued celebration among customers who viewed her departure from Sterling Industries as a victory for their values over corporate arrogance. But Cyrus understood the sacrifice Victoria had made and felt responsible for consequences he had never intended to create. Their reunion at the community center 3 weeks later happened during a town hall meeting about supporting local businesses through the economic uncertainty that always seemed to threaten working-class communities. Victoria's presence surprised everyone, including Cyrus, who had assumed she would retreat to her family's social circle after leaving the company. Instead, she had immersed herself in community advocacy, using her business expertise to help small operators navigate challenges that her previous corporate position had insulated her from understanding. Victoria's presentation about fair lending practices and supplier relationships revealed how completely she had reoriented her priorities since leaving Sterling Industries. She spoke with passion about economic justice and community development, topics that would have been theoretical abstractions during her corporate career, but had become personal missions since experiencing firsthand how social prejudices could undermine merit-based relationships. Her transformation was genuine and profound, extending far beyond romantic interest in Cyrus into fundamental changes in worldview and life purpose. The proposal that emerged from that meeting reflected both Victoria's business acumen and Cyrus's understanding of community needs. Their plan to establish a cooperative kitchen and catering service would provide affordable commercial space for small food entrepreneurs, while creating economies of scale that made quality equipment and professional training accessible to people who could never afford individual operations. The venture represented everything their previous corporate relationship could not: genuine partnership based on shared values and mutual respect. Mason's role in developing their business plan surprised both adults with his insights into logistics and customer service. His suggestions about delivery routes and scheduling reflected practical intelligence that complemented Victoria's strategic thinking and Cyrus's operational expertise. The 10-year-old had absorbed lessons about business and community from watching his father work, developing perspectives that formal education alone could never provide. The Sterling Estate's annual charity auction provided an unexpected opportunity for Victoria to demonstrate how completely she had embraced her new priorities. When Robert Sterling made pointed comments about her charitable phase and suggested she would eventually return to, quote, serious business, Victoria's response was calm but decisive. She announced her intention to bid on industrial equipment being auctioned to support their cooperative kitchen project, using inheritance money her father had intended for expanding Sterling Industries to instead create opportunities for entrepreneurs who shared his original vision of building rather than merely acquiring. Derek's attempt to reconcile with Victoria at the auction revealed how their relationship had fundamentally changed since the arm wrestling incident. His apologies felt hollow because they focused on personal slights rather than acknowledging the deeper principles he had violated through his arrogance and subsequent betrayal. Victoria listened politely but maintained emotional distance that reflected her understanding that some damage could not be repaired through words alone. The opening of Riverside Cooperative Kitchen 6 months later brought together community members who had supported Victoria and Cyrus throughout their journey, from unlikely acquaintances to business partners to something deeper that neither rushed to define. The facility's bright commercial spaces buzzed with activity as local entrepreneurs prepared specialty foods, catered events, and developed products that reflected the community's diverse cultures and traditions. Victoria's transformation from corporate executive to community advocate was complete, but never felt like a diminishment to those who knew her well. She had traded corner offices and board meetings for collaborative workspaces and town halls, but her influence had actually expanded as she learned to build consensus rather than issue directives. Her relationship with Cyrus had evolved naturally, alongside their business partnership, built on shared experiences and mutual respect rather than dramatic declarations. Mason's contentment with their unconventional family structure provided the strongest evidence that they had created something authentic and sustainable. The boy thrived in an environment where his questions were answered honestly, his ideas were taken seriously, and his father's relationship with Victoria was based on principles he could understand and admire. Their home above the cooperative kitchen felt complete in ways that wealth and status had never achieved. The arm wrestling match that had started their connection became a symbol of hidden strength, revealing itself when circumstances demanded authentic response to artificial challenges. Victoria had discovered that real power came from aligning actions with values rather than accumulating titles and possessions. Cyrus had learned that his worth was recognized by people who mattered, regardless of social barriers others tried to maintain. Together, they had proven that the most meaningful victories were achieved through persistence, integrity, and willingness to risk everything for principles that transcended personal comfort. Their story spread through Riverside City as evidence that genuine connection could overcome social prejudices when people chose courage over convenience. The cooperative kitchen became a gathering place where conversations about community development happened alongside meal preparation, creating relationships that strengthened the entire neighborhood's economic and social fabric. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.